It wasn't just a logistical nightmare. It was a slow-motion industrial suicide. How did the world's most powerful empire, a machine built for global dominance, find itself paralyzed by a simple lack of brass and powder? Why did the survival of the British line at the Somme suddenly depend on a group of people the War Office had spent decades dismissing as physically and mentally fragile? But the empty crates were only the surface. History has looked at the tactical maps, but it missed the women whose very flesh was being rewritten by the state. They were mocked, labeled as unskilled, and sent into the toxic fumes of the danger buildings without a second thought. They were expected to be cogs, but they became the conscience of a nation. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. The January 1916. The rolling hills of Nottinghamshire are no longer a pastoral escape. They are the lungs of a dying empire. The Great War has evolved into something the world has never seen, a meat grinder of industrial attrition. It is a war of calories, coal, and above all, cordite. The Western Front has become a black hole that consumes 10,000 shells a day and screams for more. In the wood-paneled rooms of Whitehall, the shell crisis is a political scandal that topples governments. On the front line, it is much simpler. It is the sound of a British battery falling silent because there is nothing left to fire, while the German guns continue their rhythmic, devastating work. The British establishment is desperate. They have run out of men to work the lathes and fill the casings. The system, rigid, patriarchal, and convinced of its own structural perfection, is forced to do the unthinkable. It opens the gates of the national shell-filling factories to an unskilled army of mothers, sisters, and daughters. They arrive at the factory gates in the gray light of dawn, thousands of them. They come from the textile mills, from domestic service, from the quiet nurseries of the middle class. To the generals in London, these women are a temporary fix, a biological stopgap. They are the fairer sex, supposedly too delicate for the roar of machinery, yet now tasked with handling the very essence of destruction. The process begins when a woman enters the locker room. She strips away her civilian identity, her silk ribbons, her hairpins, her corsets. Anything made of metal is a potential spark. Anything of the old world is a liability. She puts on a heavy, coarse smock and a cap that hides her hair. She is no longer Mary or Elizabeth. She is a unit of production. As she walks toward the danger buildings, the air begins to change. It doesn't smell of the coal smoke she is used to. It smells of bitter almonds, a sweet, deceptive scent that clings to the back of the throat. This is the smell of TNT. To the engineers, filling a shell is a simple input-output equation. You take a steel shell, you pour in the molten explosive, and you seal it. But the black box of this machine is the human body. When a worker handles the fine yellow powder of trinitrotoluene, the physics of the disaster are invisible. The dust is microscopic. It settles on the skin, and fueled by the heat of the factory, it doesn't just sit there. It dissolves into the body's natural oils, slipping through the pores and entering the bloodstream like a silent invader. Once inside, it wages a chemical war on the liver, turning the organ into a hard, useless stone. The output is a biological betrayal. Within weeks, the transformation is undeniable. A young woman looks in the mirror and sees a stranger. It starts at the scalp. Her hair, regardless of its original color, begins to turn a sickly neon green. Then the skin follows. It isn't a tan, and it isn't a bruise. It is a brilliant, haunting saffron. A yellow so deep, it looks like the sun itself has been trapped under her skin. They are becoming the Canary Girls, but the system remains unmoved. The prevailing mindset of the era, the crystallized arrogance of the boardrooms, is summed up in the cold instructions given to the foreman. These women are stopgaps. Their health is secondary to the tonnage. The staining is merely a cosmetic inconvenience, a small price for a shell in a breach. They claimed that the jaundice was a sign of a weak constitution, rather than a direct result of the poison they were forced to inhale. One worker, a girl no older than 19, approaches her supervisor. Her hands are shaking, her fingernails stained a permanent orange that no soap can reach. She complains of a metallic taste in her mouth and a pain in her side that feels like a hot iron. The supervisor doesn't look up from his clipboard. He represents the wall of the establishment. "It's the vapors, girl," he says, his voice flat and bored. "Drink some extra milk and get back to the line. There's a war on. Do you want the boys at the front to run out of luck because you've got a stomach ache?" He mocks her. He treats her pain as a lack of character. He believes the system is too big, too important to worry about the chemistry of a single girl's blood. But he has fatally underestimated the boss in this scenario: physics. The TNT doesn't care about the war effort. It doesn't care about the king. It only knows how to destroy the cells it touches. While the generals toasted their own brilliance in solving the labor shortage, a microscopic fracture was forming in the heart of the home front. The very people they dismissed as unskilled were now the only thing standing between the British Empire and total collapse. They were working 12-hour shifts in a yellow haze, their lungs burning, their eyes stinging, while the world outside chose to look away from the golden curse stealing their youth. The silence of the factory was the only thing keeping the noise of the front line alive. But as the first of the Canary Girls collapsed on the factory floor, her skin a vivid, unnatural gold, the establishment began to realize that the unskilled labor they so despised was paying a price that no treasury could ever refund. The scene shifts as the calendar turns to June 1917. The sun hangs heavy over the Woolwich Arsenal in London, but inside the high brick walls there is no summer breeze. There is only the suffocating chemical heat of the danger buildings. These structures are designed with a cruel, geometric logic. They are separated by massive earthen mounds and stagnant moats, not to keep an enemy out, but to ensure that when an accident happens, and the system accepts that accidents will happen, the resulting explosion only kills the women inside that specific block, rather than leveling the entire facility. While the generals in their chateaus obsess over the movement of pins on a map, the Canary Girls are mastering a far more volatile geography. They are the silent alchemists of the Great War. They handle amytol, a lethal cocktail of TNT and ammonium nitrate. To a civilian, it looks like harmless flour. To the women, it is a sleeping dragon. The process begins when the raw powder is poured into the mixing vats. This is the moment of the great gamble. If the temperature in the room deviates by a mere 3 degrees, or if a single grain of grit enters the mixture, the chemistry rebels. The powder doesn't just burn, it undergoes a rapid molecular expansion that turns the air itself into a hammer. The machine betrays the hand that feeds it, and in a heartbeat, the worker simply ceases to exist. The establishment remains skeptical. The crystallized arrogance of the era's lead engineers is audible in the way they speak of the female workforce. One senior director, standing safely behind a reinforced glass observation port, summarizes the prevailing mindset. The female mind is not built for the precision of the laboratory. They lack the technical stamina for the danger buildings. We are merely using them because we have run out of real laborers. They claimed that the women were slow and inefficient because they insisted on cleaning the workstations every hour. But the experts missed the point entirely. The reason the women are more efficient is found in the cognitive bridge. Because these women spent their lives in kitchens and sewing rooms, they understand the lethal importance of the little things. They treat the unstable powder not as a military asset, but as a dangerous ingredient. While the experts saw a complex chemical puzzle, the women saw a recipe that required absolute domestic perfection. They brought the obsessive cleanliness of a surgery to the filth of a factory, and in doing so, they achieved a shell failure rate far lower than the men who preceded them. But while they saved the army, they could not save themselves. The ghost in the machine is now everywhere. While the high-ranking officers argue in the bright lights of the mess hall, the Canary Girls are working in the dim, amber shadows, holding the silence that keeps the Empire's heart beating. They don't talk much. They can't. The dust coats their vocal cords, making their voices raspy and hollow. The invisible enemy is now claiming its territory. It's called toxic jaundice. Inside the black box of the human torso, the TNT is performing its final, terrible trick. The chemical enters the liver and begins to necrotize the tissue. It is a slow, internal rot. First, the whites of the eyes turn a muddy yellow. Then, the skin follows. Finally, the internal organs begin to fail, one by one. The doctors, paid by the ministry, offer a chillingly simple diagnosis to the women who collapse. "You're just tired, dear. It's the excitement of the war." They prioritize the procedure over the person. They prioritize the cost of a shell over the cost of a life. Then, the hubris meets the hammer. In the late summer of 1917, a factory manager at a northern filling station scoffs at a group of women who refuse to enter a mixing room. They warn him that the smell of the almonds is too strong today, that the air feels heavy. They sense the pressure rising in the ventilation ducts. The manager treats their warning as a feminine whim. He treats the silence of the machinery as a lack of productivity. He believes the system is too robust to be threatened by something as intangible as the air feeling wrong. He orders the shift to begin, certain that his manual and his schedule are the true masters of the arsenal. But he has fatally underestimated his opponent. It wasn't a whim. It was a warning from the women who had become one with the machine. A microscopic spark static electricity from a wool smock ignites a cloud of dust that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't a fire. It was a physical erasure. The earthen banks held just as the engineers designed. The explosion didn't destroy the factory. It only destroyed the 30 women inside. The system calculated that this was an acceptable loss. While the manager stood in the rubble, looking at his stopwatch and wondering how long it would take to replace the units, the Canary Girls in the neighboring buildings didn't scream. They didn't run. They simply picked up the next shell casing. They knew that if they stopped, the men in the mud would die. They were trading their fertility, their beauty, and their very breath for the rhythmic thud of the machinery. They were becoming the literal lifeblood of a war effort that viewed them as expendable cogs. But without them, the Great War would have ended in a whisper of empty brass. As the shift ends, they walk out into the London twilight. Under the street lamps, they don't look like women anymore. They look like statues carved from amber. Their hands are stained a permanent deep orange. Their hair is a ghostly chemical green. They have become a new species, a generation of women who have literally been dyed by the demands of an ungrateful empire. They are the only ones who know that the golden age everyone talks about is actually a golden poison, and it is already too late to wash it away. Yet November 11th, 1918. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Across the fractured, cratered landscapes of Europe, a sound occurs that no one alive can quite remember. Silence. The artillery, those massive, hungry engines that the Canary Girls spent years feeding, finally stop screaming. In London, the crowds pour into the streets like a burst dam. They dance, they weep, they burn effigies of the Kaiser under the glow of newly lit street lamps. The system has triumphed. The maps are being redrawn in ink and blood. But inside the iron gates of the national shell-filling factories, the atmosphere is not one of jubilee. It is one of sudden, eerie stagnation. For the women standing at the mixing vats, their hands still dripping with the yellow sludge of amytol, the end of the war doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like an eviction. The transition is brutal and immediate. The War Office, which only months ago hailed these women as the saviors of the empire and heroines of the home front, now views them as a logistical embarrassment. The soldiers are coming home. Millions of men are returning from the mud, and they expect their benches, their lathes, and their status back. The social order, twisted out of shape by the demands of total war, must be forced back into its pre-1914 mold, regardless of who gets crushed in the process. The process begins when the foremen walk down the lines, not with praise, but with redundancy notices. There are no medals for the girls of the danger buildings. There are no state pensions for industrial casualties. The message from the establishment is delivered with the cold efficiency of a ledger. Thank you for your service. Now please disappear. As the Canary Girls walk out of the factory gates for the last time, they carry the bitter aftertaste of a victory they paid for in blood and bone. The yellow stain on their skin will eventually fade. For some, it takes weeks of scrubbing with harsh carbolic soap. For others, months of painful exfoliation that leaves the skin raw and weeping. But the internal clock cannot be reset. The ghost in the machine has left a permanent molecular mark. In the years following the armistice, a strange and heartbreaking phenomenon emerges in the industrial heartlands of Britain. It is the final, cruel irony of the munitions factories. Women who spent their pregnancies packing shells, inhaling the bitter almond dust of TNT, give birth to children whose skin is a bright, vivid, unnatural orange. They are known as TNT babies. To the medical community of the 1920s, these infants are treated as a curiosity, a biological footnote in a medical journal. But to the mothers, they are a living, breathing testament to a sacrifice that the history books are already beginning to erase. These children carry the golden curse into the next generation, a physical manifestation of a war that refused to stay on the battlefield. It was as if the state had branded the very offspring of the workers to ensure their service would never be forgotten, even as the government did its best to do exactly that. While the generals receive knighthoods and the politicians write their thick, self-serving memoirs in leather-bound volumes, the Canary Girls return to the shadows of domesticity. Many find that the black box of their bodies is permanently broken. Their lungs are scarred, their breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps for the rest of their shortened lives. Others discover the poison has stolen their ability to ever have children again, their reproductive systems ravaged by the chemical invader they were told was perfectly safe. They sit in the back of the victory parades, their raspy chemical coughs drowned out by the cheering for the men in khaki. They are the uncredited medals of the Great War. History is written by the victors, but it is edited by the comfortable. The establishment conveniently forgets the girls who turned yellow so the world could stay free. They are scrubbed from the national narrative because their presence is a reminder of a terrifying truth, that the system will gladly consume its own children to ensure its survival. It is easier to celebrate a tactical breakthrough at the Somme than it is to acknowledge the thousands of women whose livers turned to stone in the sheds of Nottinghamshire. The modern echo of this story is not found in the museums. It is found in our own mirrors. Today, we still rely on invisible agents of change, low-ranking individuals who keep the gears of our modern civilization turning while we ignore the toxic costs they bear. We see the same hubris in the way we treat our essential workers in times of crisis, praising them as heroes when the shells are falling, only to discard them and ignore their health when the silence returns and the budgets are tightened. We must ask ourselves, what parts of our humanity are we currently altering to ensure the survival of our own massive, unfeeling systems? Whose skin are we allowing to turn yellow today for the sake of our convenience? The story of the Canary Girls is a warning from the dust of time. It tells us that the greatest tragedies aren't always found in the explosions, but in the silence that follows when the people who saved the world are ushered into the dark, unthanked, unknown, and permanently changed. If you believe that stories like those of the Canary Girls deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing and like this video. Your support ensures that these voices are never truly silenced. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.